Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. And we got some big stories for you today. You know, they call me a decision maker. I make decisions, and I make a lot of big ones and I make a lot of little ones, quoting George W. Bush, of course. A lot of great stories to get to, including just desserts for Rudy Giuliani, which we will lead the show with. But later in the second hour of the show, true, John Iadarola is still not here. He's on family leave. However, Wosny Lambre will be joining me, and we'll discuss the latest social media influencer in the country. He's making waves with his content. His name is Donald J. Trump. So we'll show you examples of what is sure to be one of the worst ideas for Donald Trump, a man who is now facing criminal indictments in 4 separate cases. Like, what are you doing? This is a bad idea. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. He didn't get that message, so we'll discuss that along with many other stories. As always, just want to encourage you all to like and share the stream if you're watching us on YouTube. Easy, free way to get the message of TYT out there to the masses. You can also help support the show and get exclusive members only content by becoming a member. Just go to tyt.com/join or click on that join button if you're watching us on YouTube. Now, without further ado, let's get to a big update for Rudy Giuliani and some of the, cases that he's been catching as a result of his own behavior.
He's gonna lose. He was always gonna lose. And now he's even more clearly going to lose because he's essentially admitted that he made false and defamatory statements about them. The language in the document that was filed by his lawyers that he reserves the right to challenge the constitutionality of the matter. I bet you'd have a hard time finding a First Amendment lawyer who has the vaguest idea what he's talking about. He's sort of cooked in this case.
Cooked indeed. Former Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani is now staring down a massive financial penalty after losing a federal defamation case filed against him by 2 Fulton County, Georgia election workers. And we'll get to the judge's decision and what spurred it in just a moment. But first, I think it's worth getting a little bit of a refresher on this case and what exactly Giuliani has been found guilty of. Now, the lawsuit was brought forth by Ruby Freeman and her daughter, Shay Moss, who say they've suffered reputational damage and emotional harm after Giuliani specifically singled them out and made false claims that the mother-daughter duo engaged in ballot tampering after the 2020 presidential election. Giuliani's statements about them included calling them ballot-stuffing criminal conspirators. Giuliani also drew attention to a video of them after the election, which was first posted by the Trump campaign and showed part of a security tape of ballot counting in Atlanta. On social media, his podcast and other broadcasts, Giuliani said the video showed suitcases filled with ballots when it did not capture anything but normal ballot processing. And that's according to the defamation lawsuit and a state investigation. These were just some of the many lies we heard from Giuliani and Donald Trump after he lost his re-election bid. Both women testified before the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol riots. In fact, here's Ruby Freeman discussing what she had to endure following Giuliani's unfounded claims of ballot tampering.
I've lost my name and I've lost my reputation. I've lost my sense of security, all because a group of people starting with number 45 and his ally, Rudy Giuliani, decided to scapegoat me and my daughter, Shay.
18,000 voters having to do with Ruby Freeman. She's a vote scammer, a professional vote scammer and hustler.
Their places of work, their homes should have been searched for evidence of ballots, for evidence of USB ports, for evidence of voter fraud.
Do you know how it feels to have the president of the United States to target you? The president of the United States is supposed to represent every American, not to target one, but he targeted me, Lady Ruby, a small business owner, a mother, a proud American citizen who stand up to help Fulton County run an election in the middle of the pandemic.
Just absolutely disgusting. Everything you heard from Giuliani and Donald Trump in the video we just showed you, complete and utter lies. And Ruby Freeman is absolutely correct in noting the type of terror someone in the country would face as a result of the literal president of the United States targeting her, okay? Basically directing all sorts of unhinged people to harass and threaten her and her daughter. By the way, the suit also alleges that during Giuliani's disinformation campaign, the FBI recommended that Freeman leave her home for her own safety. Freeman's daughter, Shay Moss, expressed that she was afraid for her safety due to Giuliani's lies, which, by the way, isn't really that difficult to believe when you consider the rage demonstrated by rioters on January 6th as they tore through the Capitol building.
My life upside down. I no longer give out my business card. I don't transfer calls. I don't want anyone knowing my name. I don't want to go anywhere with my mom because she might yell my name out over the grocery aisle or something. I don't go to the grocery store at all. I haven't been anywhere at all. I felt like it was all my fault. Like, if I would have never decided to be an elections worker, like, I could have done anything else, but that's what I decided to do. And now people are lying and spreading rumors and lies and attacking my mom. I'm her only child. And I felt horrible for picking this job and being the one that always wants to help and always there, and never missing out one election. I just felt like it was my fault for putting my family in this situation.
That's absolutely awful, and she obviously should not feel that way. The fact that she wanted to spend her time and energy in being an election worker in a country that is supposed to value our democratic process does not make her a bad person. It makes her someone who actually believes in that democratic process, unlike Giuliani and unlike Donald Trump. Now, Paper Dragon in our Twitch community argues that Giuliani is guilty of leaking hair dye, which is true. And if that were the case, I'd say let him go. But there's obviously more involved in Giuliani's behavior here, and it had a massive impact on these women's lives. Just last month, Giuliani confessed that he made false statements about the women. He had confessed it, he admitted it, but that the defamation case against him is supposedly unconstitutional. So the court filing read that, quote, defendant Giuliani, for the purposes of litigation only, does not contest that to the extent the statements were statements of fact and otherwise actionable, such actionable factual statements were false. Giuliani wrote in a signed stipulation that he said was intended to avoid unnecessary expenses in litigating what he believes to be unnecessary disputes. Well, we all know that Giuliani's broke, and this attempt to essentially do away with the case was pretty hilarious and actually ended up biting him in the ass later. Here's more on Giuliani's confession and the legal maneuvering he was hoping to accomplish by filing it.
He's conceding that, yes, he did make these false statements about these women after the 2020 election. He's also saying that he acknowledges that those statements can be defamatory, that they were defamatory, but he's trying to avoid his own accountability here by saying in this court filing late last night that his statements mean that he shouldn't necessarily have to pay damages to them because his statements alone might not be what was hurting these women. And also, he's trying to say that what he was saying after the 2020 election is still protected speech, First Amendment constitutionally protected speech.
Well, look, the Constitution does in fact protect most speech, but there are limitations to the First Amendment, as there are with other constitutional rights. While one can even engage in things like hate speech without fear of government retaliation, there are exceptions, including inciting violence or defamation of character. So Giuliani's filing did nothing to persuade the judge that his lies about specific election workers were protected speech. But aside from that, US District Judge Beryl Howell determined that Giuliani lost because he struggled to maintain access to his electronic records and did not adequately respond to subpoenas from attorneys for Freeman and Moss as the case moved forward. The bottom line is that Giuliani has refused to comply with his discovery obligations and thwarted plaintiffs Rudy Freeman and Shay Moss's procedural rights to obtain any meaningful discovery in this case. The judge continued to argue that just as taking shortcuts to win an election carries risks, even potential criminal liability, bypassing the discovery process carries serious sanctions, no matter what reservations a non-compliant party may try to artificially preserve for appeal. And there's some speculation that Giuliani likely didn't have the resources to properly cooperate in the discovery process. In fact, the lack of resources led to him trying to engage in that ridiculous maneuvering that essentially led to him confessing that he had defamed these women. But look, failing to cooperate proved to be pretty pricey for the former New York City mayor. Giuliani has already been sanctioned almost $90,000 for Freeman and Moss's attorney's fees in the case, and Howell says that he could be saddled with even more fines. Judge Howell says a trial to determine the amount of damages for which Giuliani will be held liable will be set later this year or possibly early 2024. The election workers are asking for unspecified damages, which could amount to millions of dollars. So if you're concerned about your resources, maybe don't engage in defaming people's character. Don't engage in trying to destroy their lives because you didn't like the results of our democratic process. And while this is a civil suit that leads to Giuliani having to pay damages to the individuals that he defamed, keep in mind he's also facing other criminal charges in regard to his attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, and I hope Giuliani is realizing that, at least in the moments when he's sober. With that said though, let's move on to our next story. There's a lot more news to get to today.
Hawaiian Electric, facing more than a dozen lawsuits for allegedly not de-energizing its power lines ahead of a severe wind event or properly maintaining its equipment, released a series of new assertions, including that the fire at 6:30 a.m., the morning fire, appears to have been caused by power lines that fell in high winds, that the Maui County Fire Department responded and reported it 100% contained, left the scene, and later declared it extinguished. And perhaps most importantly, at about 3 p.m., a time when all of Hawaiian Electric's power lines in West Maui had been de-energized for more than 6 hours, a second fire, the afternoon fire, began in the same area, with the cause undetermined.
It's been 3 weeks since fires devastated Maui's seaside community of Lahaina in Hawaii, marking the deadliest wildfires in more than a century. 115 people have died as a result, and as the town is trying to return to some semblance of normalcy, the blame game over who or what was responsible for the fires rages on. Now, while Hawaiian Electric recently acknowledged that its power lines fell due to high winds and ignited a fire early on the morning of August 8th, they also claim that they're not fully to blame for the outcome of the fire. Hawaiian Electric faulted county firefighters for declaring the blaze contained and leaving the scene, only to have a second wildfire break out nearby and become the deadliest in the United States in more than a century. Hawaiian Electric said its own crews then went to the scene that afternoon to make repairs and did not see fire, smoke, or embers. The power to the area was off at that point. Shortly before 3 p.m., those crews saw a small fire in a nearby field and called 911, the utility said. Okay, just stop and absorb what I just told you guys, okay? That's right. They are admitting that their downed power lines, which had not been de-energized, caused the initial fire. They're admitting that, okay? But they're also blaming the firefighters. Just absolute insanity. So let's keep going. What else are they claiming here? Okay, so move up a little bit. So they're refusing to really focus on how their own incompetence and their own unwillingness to de-energize those power lines ahead of time had an impact. They want to share the blame with the firefighters who risked their lives to put out those fires. Luckily, Maui County officials have filed a lawsuit against the utility company. And that lawsuit accused the utility, Hawaiian Electric, of failing to respond to ominous weather reports on the day of the fires, August 8th, when red flag fire danger warnings were issued because of hurricane-fueled winds and of failing to perform basic maintenance in the years beforehand. That sounds real familiar. Now, defendants knew of the extreme fire danger that the high wind gusts pose to their overhead electrical infrastructure, particularly during red flag conditions, the lawsuit said. It said power company officials had chosen not to de-energize their power lines, even though they knew that power poles and power lines were falling and coming into contact with dry vegetation. So the power lines consisted of bare, uninsulated metal, and they're known to spark fires on impact. In fact, California has had similar problems. Back in 2018, when Pacific Gas and Electric's down power lines sparked the deadly Camp Fire, 85 people died. Just like with PG&E, there had been a push for Hawaiian Electric to upgrade its equipment by either insulating the wires or burying them below ground. Now, clearly that didn't happen. Equipment upgrades obviously cut into profits, and when the profit motive reigns supreme, you can bet that these utility companies will do little to upgrade a damn thing. It really depends on the local lawmakers and regulators to enforce rules that pressure and force them to, upgrade the equipment so these issues don't come up. Now, compounding the problem is that many of the utilities' 60,000 mostly wooden power poles, which its own documents described as built to an obsolete 1960s standard, were leaning and near the end of their projected lifespan. They were nowhere close to meeting a 2002 national standard that key components of Hawaii's electrical grid be able to withstand 105 mile-per-hour winds. Hawaiian Electric released a statement Sunday night in response to Maui County's lawsuit, calling the complaint factually and legally irresponsible. Hawaiian Electric appeared to blame Maui County for most of the devastation because the fire appeared to reignite that afternoon after the lines were allegedly de-energized. They claimed that its power lines in West Maui had been de-energized for more than 6 hours when the second blaze started. Lawyers suing the utility company luckily aren't buying it. So Richard Freed, a Honolulu attorney working as co-counsel on Maui County's lawsuit, countered that if their power lines hadn't caused the initial fire, this all would be moot. And that's absolutely true. I mean, the fire started as a result of energized power lines that fell and ignited the fire. In an environment, by the way, that was particularly dry and particularly dangerous. The energy company knew, the utility company knew that this would be a problem. I don't know why they decided against de-energizing the lines ahead of time. They had ample warning. Here's more from attorney Gerald Singleton.
We have looked at the evidence very closely. We have people on the ground. There is absolutely no evidence to support Hiko's claim. In contrast, all of the evidence we've seen is that the lines were energized.
One of the parties that Singleton Schreiber represents, the family of Lorenzo Buddy Jantok II, who suffered second and third degree burns to 90% of his body, according to the lawsuit, leaving behind children, grandchildren, and a rich legacy. If there was a plan to de-energize the lines, Singleton says that's not what Hiko told the federal government about a PSPS, or public safety power shutoff.
For Hiko to say on the one hand, in a filing that's under penalty of perjury and that is with the SEC, that they did not have a PSPS, and then on the other hand, to say that they shut off the power is completely inconsistent.
Hawaiian Electric officials didn't respond to the allegation specifically, but instead said this: our primary focus in the wake of this unimaginable tragedy has been to do everything we can to support not just the people of Maui, but also Maui County. We are very disappointed that Maui County chose this litigious path while the investigation is still unfolding. I don't know if they realize this, But 115 people are gone, they're dead, leaving their family members to piece together their own lives, leaving people who lost their homes, everything that they've built for themselves, gone. They're left to deal with all of that. The idea that this company wants to skirt any responsibility, well, honestly, at this point should not come as any surprise. In fact, the company seems to like skirting important questions, as you'll see in this next video.
Why didn't you shut off the power when the wind started to pick up?
As I said earlier, it's still in the early days. We're still looking at all the information, and we haven't actually had a chance to do all of that at this time.
With all due respect, it's been 6 days though, so almost 6 days.
And we've been putting everything we've got to helping our communities right now and our employees who are going through a lot and supporting them so that they can support the communities. You may be talking about what happens in California and the shutoff program. And so we, like most utilities, don't have that program.
Hawaiian Electric is also coming up with some pretty interesting excuses in its defense, claiming that the water system in Lahaina relies on the electrical system to pump water through the network and deliver it to fire hydrants. So the company says that they need to maintain that pumping capability factored into their decision about de-energizing power lines, meaning they didn't want to de-energize the power lines in case there was a fire and the firefighters needed access to that water, which the electricity is important for. Look, honestly, I'm not sure how much truth there is to that. We're not idiots. I mean, consider the fact that they later de-energized power lines as firefighters were combating the blaze. But one thing we do know for sure is that the fire was one of the most deadly fires in modern American history. According to Politico, crews in Hawaii have finished their search for victims, but it's unclear how many people are still missing. Maui Police Chief John Pelletier said urban search and rescue teams have completed 100% of their area, but some search activity continues in the ocean off Lahaina. The FBI is searching 200 yards out along a 4-mile stretch of coastline, but no human remains have been found, he said. There are 110 missing persons reports filed with Maui police, and more than 50 of those remain open cases that are still actively being worked, he said. Officials suggested that responders likely have already recovered any remains that are recognizable. They are now shifting their focus to removing hazardous waste and making the area safe for residents to return to. But one thing that I will say is that the idea that this utility company is not to blame, completely to blame, and that the attention should be focused on the firefighters is absolutely ludicrous. And not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but some of you have asked why I have such a negative reaction to any mention of California Governor Gavin Newsom running for president of the United States. When the Camp Fire killed dozens of people in the state because PG&E couldn't be bothered to upgrade their electrical equipment, they got sued, they went bankrupt, and you know who bailed them out? Gavin Newsom. I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with slimy, sleazy politicians providing cover for privatized companies that screw over their own constituents. So that's where I stand with Gavin Newsom, or on Gavin Newsom, and that's just the tip of the iceberg with him. Now the real question remains, what will local lawmakers and politicians do to help support and protect the people of Maui? What will they do to hold the utility companies accountable? I like that they filed this lawsuit, but should they lose that lawsuit? Should they go bankrupt? What happens next? That's the real question. And the priority should be, again, to help the people of Maui who have suffered the most as a result of the incompetence and the inaction that sparked this fire in the first place. We got to take a break. When we come back, we have more news for you, including a little known lawsuit that the GOP has filed, which could result in further weakening of our campaign finance laws. Don't miss it. We'll be right back. Special thanks to our new members. We have Melissa Gross and David Cutter. You guys are amazing. Thank you for supporting the show and everything we do here at TYT. And thank you to Kelly K, who gifted a membership. Just want to read some comments from our members, starting with Greg, who says, people who volunteer to fight the fires in Maui, and this is what they get. Despicable. Well, this is what they get from a utility company that wants to shift the blame away from them after they failed to de-energize their power lines. Kelly K writes in and says, happy birthday to me. Happy birthday, Kelly. It's my 3-year TYT anniversary. Trump got me a mug shot and an indictment with Rudy. Cheers to the best online community. Kelly, thank you so much. And thank you for supporting the show. Bubba Franks, the Sword Dragon, writes in and says, uninsulated wires, how is that still legal? I mean, it's funny because there are federal standards that obviously make it clear that Hawaiian Electric's equipment was outdated and not up to par. But what good does that do if there's no enforcement mechanism? You get what I'm saying? Like you can, it reminds me of like Michael Scott, right? When he declared bankruptcy in one of the episodes of The Office, like I declare bankruptcy. It doesn't work that way. You need to actually take action, but the federal government didn't actually take action, and clearly neither did the state of Hawaii. Peter Hamby says PG&E, procrastination, benefit, and enrage. Yeah, I don't get me started on California stuff. I'm gonna lose my mind on that. Box writes in and says, I almost died in a wildfire in Northern California. Still have the burn scars on my feet. Box, I am so sorry you went through that. I'm sorry to anyone who has suffered as a result of these wildfires, these hurricanes, these extreme weather events, insurance companies dropping like flies and refusing to pay out any of the insurance claims, leaving people to piece together their lives with little resources. I mean, there are so many issues right now with everything that's going on with these natural disasters, these extreme weather events. We really need to fight to create a system that actually looks out for ordinary people rather than continue victimizing them. Julie Warner, the little Aussie who's been a member for 4 months, writes in and says, good morning from Oz. You are looking as beautiful as ever, Anna. Thank you so much, Julie, I appreciate that. Moving over to our super chats, we have dog named Cat who just says, woo, yeah. What's the thing? Let's go. Now that my husband's like coaching high school kids on baseball, he's like a head baseball coach. He says "let's go" all the time. So let's go to Carissimo, who says, I hope the penalty award, this is the Rudy Giuliani story. I hope the penalty award is at least in the millions so she can hire a bodyguard or two. And I don't see why they both shouldn't sue the sewer rat ex-president for 10 million plus each. Yeah, I am curious about whether Donald Trump is gonna face a defamation lawsuit. He definitely participated in the defamation. I guess we'll see. But for now, let's get back to the show. Welcome back to the show, everyone. One of the topics that we talk about quite often on the show is how bribery due to basically Supreme Court rulings is now baked into our political system, and there are consequences to that. But if you think that corruption was already a problem, get a load of what could be happening very soon in the near future. The American political system could become a lot more corrupt soon. That's because of a little-known lawsuit filed by the GOP that would allow for official party committees and candidates to coordinate freely by removing current spending restrictions. As Politico notes, an eventual victory in this lawsuit filed last November by the National Republican Senatorial Committee and the National Republican Congressional Committee would eliminate the need for House and Senate campaign committees of any party to set up separate operations to make so-called independent expenditures to boost campaigns with TV ads. So look, this story, it gets a little complicated. It's in the weeds. I'm gonna do my best to make it digestible and easy to understand. But in order to fully understand how the victory for the GOP would actually transform our already weak campaign finance laws and exacerbate corruption in our political system, let's get into the details on what the current laws are before discussing how they could change. So under the existing campaign finance reform, the National Republican Campaign Committee and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee can spend between $59,000 and $119,000 in coordination with their candidates. The NRSC and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee can spend between $119,000 and $3.6 million, which by the way sounds like a lot of money. But beyond that, party committees must rely on their independent expenditure operations, known internally as IEs. Now, independent expenditure arms require a degree of separation from the candidates. Their staff cannot directly coordinate with candidates or those in their organization who don't work for the IE. They communicate in code through so-called red boxes on hidden public websites during the fall TV ad campaigns. So let me break it down even further, okay? What this basically means is you have, the national committees for both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. They fundraise, they raise a lot of money, and they've got a ton of money to spend and burn, right? Now they can coordinate with their candidates up to a certain amount and up to a certain amount of money specifically. However, past that amount of money, they're not able to spend and coordinate with these specific candidates. And while there are limits to how much money you can donate directly to an individual campaign, those limitations are less restrictive for national party committees. They can take in a lot more money, bigger donations, which tend to attract quite a bit of cash from moneyed interest, including Wall Street players and big banks. So let's take a look at the National Republican Congressional Committee back in 2020. So these are the top 2020 contributors to the NRCC, okay? So it's important to keep in mind that while you see Marcus Foundation, they donated nearly $1 million. Charles Schwab, nearly $1 million. Reyes Holding, nearly $1 million. You've got Energy Transfer LP, more than $500,000 in one election cycle alone to the Republican Party. Then you have Uline Inc., $513,775 in donations. It's important to note that there's a little trick being played here because the companies themselves are actually restricted from donating unlimited amounts of money to campaign committees. However, individuals associated with those firms, including executives, employees, and those people's immediate family members donate large sums instead, effectively on behalf of the company. So in other words, Marcus Foundation itself didn't technically give the NRCC nearly $1 million. Rather, people within and associated with the organization did. And individuals are able to donate larger sums of money to the committees on their own. When it comes to individual campaigns or candidates, the amount of money is actually much less, right? They can donate, I believe it's a little over $5,000 each election cycle to each specific candidate. But that amount is actually much larger when it comes to donating to the national party committees. Now, in addition, with committees working in concert with their candidates, millions of dollars will effectively be funneled into individual campaigns, allowing party committees to purchase TV airtime at much cheaper rates offered to candidates. Experts say that this will allow big donors to exert more influence over candidates, even more influence than they already have. Super PACs will remain the same, even if the courts rule in favor of the GOP's claims in this lawsuit. But does that really matter when wealthy donors can just donate to national party committees instead, knowing full well that these fundraising arms can coordinate directly with the candidates, no restrictions? So what's the likelihood that this case gets decided in the Republican Party's favor? Unfortunately, very likely. So the case currently lies with Ohio District Court Judge Douglas Cole, a Trump appointee who only has to determine whether this case should be sent to the Sixth Circuit for review. And look, he gave Republicans a lot of hope in early August when he ordered a speedy 3-month discovery period, which hints that this case is headed to the higher court for full arguments. In fact, Judge Cole indicated to attorneys involved in the case earlier this month that he was setting a fast timeline to get arguments up to the circuit court. And the Sixth Circuit is a fairly conservative bench with a near super majority of GOP appointed judges. The venue itself is a win for Republicans. The FEC, Federal Elections Committee, sought to have the case either dismissed on technical grounds or moved to federal court in DC, but Cole denied that request. And should the FEC challenge the case all the way to the Supreme Court, you should keep in mind that SCOTUS voted 6-3 to roll back another campaign finance regulation, which could indicate a willingness to strike down other longstanding laws. And while, look, the Republican Party has brought this suit forward, I want to be absolutely clear about something. It's not just the Republican Party that stands to benefit from the loosened campaign finance laws. Obviously, this would apply to Democrats as well. And it's just another example of how our whatever remains of efforts to prevent bribery and corruption in our political system, they just keep getting chipped away at. And there are consequences to that. Because if you have these moneyed interests providing a lot of funding for these political campaigns and these specific candidates, well, they're gonna have a lot more pressure or say over what those politicians actually end up fighting for once they are in fact elected or reelected. And that's where the issue is, right? Oftentimes you'll see politicians like Joe Biden, for instance. He ran on, wanting to fight for a public option in our healthcare system. He didn't fight for that at all. He claimed that he was gonna fight for the PRO Act to improve the ability of labor to organize their workplaces. Didn't fight for that either. And so it's one thing to hear them campaign on something, which oftentimes will get them elected, but it's not surprising that they then abandon those campaign promises, keeping in mind who funded their campaigns the most. And technically it's the moneyed interests that have money to burn. The fact that you have individuals within any given corporation or company donating nearly $1 million to one national party committee tells you all you need to know. That drowns out the voices of individual voters or small dollar donors, grassroots individuals, right? Who donate, let's say $26 to a campaign. Their voices get drowned out in this system. And so I think this is something that voters, both right and left, can agree on. In order to have a political system that actually looks out for the best interests of ordinary people, ordinary constituents, you have to ensure that everyone is on an even playing field in our political system. That is not the case right now. The fact that we have essentially baked bribery into the system and allowed for this corruption to be as bad as it already is just ludicrous. But it's about to get worse if the GOP gets its way with this lawsuit. All right, we gotta take a break. When we come back, we have more to get to. I'm gonna read some of your comments during the break, but when we come back, we're also gonna talk a little bit about something pretty awful that Greg Abbott did in regard to workers' rights and protections. We'll also talk about how there is a group of sheriffs in the country that don't believe that they should enforce the law, but rather decide which laws they should enforce. That and more coming up, don't miss it. I wanted to address something that I did see in the news today, but we're not going to cover, mostly because I don't know what to say about it other than it's awful and he should not be in the Senate. So Just There for Tea wrote in and said, did you see Mitch McConnell glitched again? Mitch McConnell is clearly suffering some sort of medical issue. I don't know what it is. I am not a medical professional, but during a press conference today, he froze up for a long time. I believe it was a little over 30 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. It was difficult to watch. I hate those stories for many reasons. Number one, these are people who are like in positions of power in our government, and that is concerning. Same goes for Dianne Feinstein. The other thing is, it makes me feel, as much as I hate him as a politician, he's still a person, and watching him very publicly suffer, a medical issue, it's just not fun to watch. Same goes for Dianne Feinstein. Like I don't enjoy it at all. I want to be clear about that. But with that said, I do think that they should resign. It's ridiculous that they're United States senators and they're clearly not in the physical and mental health necessary to do their jobs appropriately. Anyway, all right, let's move on. Sticky Souls writes in and says, I'm from Cali. Gavin Newsom looks like that slimy used car salesman that, I'm loving this comment. More of this, please. That slimy used car salesman that would sell his own mother a faulty vehicle if he could make a profit. 100%, 100%. Sticky Souls, write in more often, I love it. Frank Rockefeller says, why beat around the bush, making selling your secret vote to political parties a legal aspect of democracy? Let the political market decide. Well, the problem is the political market is dominated financially by a very small and powerful group of people. And if they have all of the resources to essentially drown all of us out, what good is that? What good is our democracy? You get what I'm saying? So I do think that these regulations need to be reestablished, campaign finance regulations. That I don't think that's going to happen. The very politicians who benefit from the legalized bribery aren't going to turn things around. But you can check out wolf-pac.com, which is Cenk's political project to get money out of politics. If you're interested in helping to move toward a constitutional convention to include a constitutional amendment for publicly financed elections. Peter Hamby writes in and says, no truth about it. His site, a social failure, Chambers of Echoes. Another poem, her ruby shining, victory from defamed fight. Jewel loses luster, and Jewel is spelled like Giuliani. I like that, it's really good. All right, let's get back to the show.
Hot dog is my favorite meat.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Anna Kasparian. I want to talk a little bit about what workers across the country are currently faced with as they deal with heat waves and workplaces that just simply do not have any air conditioning.
Garcia is still processing the sudden death of her 29-year-old cousin, Efrain Lopez Garcia, a farm worker in Homestead, Florida. On July 6th, he died while working outdoors in the sweltering heat.
Well, unfortunately, he is not the only worker who has died due to hot temperatures and poor working conditions. In fact, a Kroger employee in Tennessee has just died as a result of extreme heat at the workplace that does not have air conditioning. Sounds like a bit of a problem, especially when we're talking about labor that requires you to, be incredibly physical. And that was certainly the case for Tony Rufus, who worked in the salvage department of the grocery store, which again did not have air conditioning, or at least that area did not have air conditioning. He tried to cool himself off after getting overheated in the produce section of the store, but Memphis police ended up finding him dead at 8:13 p.m. Now, Teamsters 667 leader Maurice Wiggins told local media that Guy said he was dripping with sweat asking for water. Wiggins said Rufus died on a dock in front of his coworkers. His death comes after his union had been asking the company for more breaks, cooler temperatures, and drinks other than just water. And if you're wondering what that means, likely, fluids that have electrolytes and can help hydrate people a little quicker. Now, workers' unions across the country are in fact demanding better, cooler working conditions as heat waves rage on across the country. And as we know, every year seems to get hotter and hotter as a result of the climate emergency. It's very serious, but installing air conditioning cuts into profits. So of course these companies are gonna fight against it. Now, when you look at companies like UPS, where their workers are unionized, they've got some leverage. And as a result of that leverage, they just secured an incredibly good contract, a new contract that ensures that their delivery drivers get to deliver packages in vehicles that are air conditioned. That's what happens when you have a seat at the table, when you have some leverage as a worker in an organized workplace. But unfortunately, workers' unions, or I should say, the percentage of employees protected by workers' unions is incredibly low in this country. And so those who do not have that leverage end up suffering the consequences of this system where companies want to maximize profits in an era where temperatures just get hotter and hotter every single year. Now, conservative political forces are pushing back against any effort to pass regulations ensuring that these workplaces have the proper breaks and work environment to keep people safe during these high temperatures. Lobbyists from the agriculture and construction industries, for instance, are working to prevent heat protection laws from going into effect at state and federal levels. And then the Biden administration has proposed some federal regulations requiring workers be protected from the heat, but no such law has materialized so far. And in September of 2021, the Biden administration announced the launch of a rulemaking effort at the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA, of course, to develop heat exposure standards to protect outdoor and indoor workers. But there are pretty powerful lobbying groups representing various industries that, again, are fighting back against that rather aggressively. The American Farm Bureau Federation has objected to that proposal, for instance. Considering the variances in agricultural work and climate, they argue. AFBF questions whether the department can develop additional heat illness regulations without imposing new onerous burdens on farmers and ranchers that will lead to economic losses. It's really not that difficult, right? Like, give people the proper breaks, ensure that they have adequate access to water. Like, these are not difficult things. It's not like the Biden administration proposed that like these agricultural workers be protected by a giant tent above the entire farm or something crazy like that. But they don't want to spend a single dollar making the working conditions better for the workers, which is why, again, when you're dealing with a workplace, or if you're a farm worker and you're not unionized, you have to kind of rely on the whims of the government, either state, local government, or federal government. And certainly in the case of the federal government, we're talking about significant legalized bribery being baked into the system, which leads to a lot of these lawmakers listening to moneyed interests as opposed to doing right by their constituents and these workers. Now, let's go to the state level, because this is what I found particularly disgusting while researching for this story. So in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott signed a law that eliminated local rules requiring water breaks for workers. Here's more on that.
Under this new law, the state will have power to override municipal code throughout Texas in certain circumstances. So any law that is stricter than state law. And currently, some cities like Dallas mandate construction workers take a 10-minute break every 4 hours. So with this new law, that mandate would disappear. Opponents say this takes away the city's or town's right to protect its workers. Critics are calling it, quote, the Death Star bill. That's a Star Wars reference. But first, you're going to hear from a supporter who says small businesses who don't have the staff to keep track of all the different laws and regulations across different cities, it will make things easier. It will cut down on confusion and make things more consistent across the state when it comes to labor and other regulations.
So I want to note that this new change will go into effect on September 1st in Texas. But what I'm about to tell you is kind of symbolic, well, not symbolic, it actually happened, but you should expect a lot more of this considering the weakening of labor protection in the state of Texas. So shortly after that law passed, a 35-year-old utility lineman in Marshall, Texas, died after experiencing heat illness symptoms. We live in the United States of America, one of the richest countries in the world, where corporate profits year after year increase and where ordinary people see their wages stagnate, see their working conditions deteriorate. Now, luckily, because of some leverage that workers have, wages have gone up a little bit. But the fact that we can't have safe working conditions in the United States of America tells you everything you need to know about the imbalance of power we have in our democratic system, where again, the whims and the desires of corporate interests outweigh the concerns of ordinary Americans and the very workers who make things happen in this country, who keep things running in this country, who produce the food you eat, okay, who make the products you buy, who provide the services you need. These are the people who get screwed day in, day out, and you should know, very likely you're an American worker. But with that said, the law will now revert to OSHA regulations, which I just told you that the OSHA regulations are too weak, which is why the Biden administration wanted to upgrade them to ensure that there were rules in place to protect workers during these terrible heat waves. Now, hundreds of American workers have died in recent years as a result of extreme heat on the job. I think it's important to take a step back and look at the broader picture here, because it's not just a few stories here and there. It's not just a few lives lost here and there. Since 2011, there have been 436 work-related deaths caused by environmental heat exposure, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. According to UPS company records obtained by the Washington Post, at least 143 UPS employees were hospitalized for heat or dehydration-related injuries between 2015 and 2022. Now, luckily, with this new contract that the labor union signed on behalf of the UPS workers will provide additional protections and air conditioning to prevent these types of deaths from occurring in the future. But if you're not unionized, if you don't have an organized workplace and you have no leverage, who's gonna protect you? Who's gonna look out for you? Is it gonna be the federal government? Honestly, at this point, I would say unlikely. So please talk to your workers if you can. Consider unionizing your workplace, because it could literally be a life or death situation if you don't. This is insane. The fact that we've had hundreds of workers die as a result of heat, as a result of dehydration, not having the basics to protect them is absolutely ludicrous and disgusting. Anyway, let's do one more story before we wrap up the first hour and go to the second hour with Waz. This one is insane. We've actually covered this story in the past, but we do have some updates because it's still a problem. While law enforcement is, supposed to do what their title describes, enforce the law, some want to serve as lawmakers and judges to determine whether they agree with the laws in the first place. So the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association is a sheriff's organization that believes that sheriffs have the right to determine if a law or laws are unconstitutional and then choose whether or not they enforce those laws. Again, these are members of law enforcement. These are not individuals who are legislating or governing the country. They're not the ones who make the laws. We didn't elect them. We pay them, but they apparently don't want to do their jobs. They want to be the ones who decide whether or not the laws are okay. So one of their board members argues that the sheriff is supposed to be protecting the public from evil when your government is evil or out of line. That's what the sheriff is there for, protecting them from that. No, Darleaf, that is not what law enforcement is for. Law enforcement is supposed to enforce the law. That's what law enforcement is supposed to do. That's the whole point. And I'm gonna back up for a second and just say this. Law enforcement, I believe, is an incredibly important part of a well-functioning society. But the question is, what is law enforcement made up of? Who are the people within law enforcement? If you have people who just refuse to enforce the law or decide that they don't like laws and they're not gonna enforce it, or should they be allowed to serve as members of law enforcement? I would venture to say no, and the fact that they're publicly saying these things without any consequences is concerning to say the least, especially at a time when trust for law enforcement is at an all-time low. I hate that. I want to change that. And the only way to change that is to create a system in which people feel that law enforcement is actually protecting and serving. That is not what's taking place here. Further, the organization's founder, Arizona Sheriff Richard Mack, argues that the safest way to actually achieve that is to have local law enforcement understand that they have no obligation to enforce such laws. Well, I live in Los Angeles. I've definitely experienced some of that. They're not laws at all anyway. If they're unjust laws, they are laws of tyranny. As you can imagine, we're not talking about cops who want to like sit by and watch, let's say, someone shoplift without any consequences. No. It's very specific things they don't want to enforce, including gun control laws, a little problematic. During the coronavirus pandemic, they didn't want to enforce, mask mandates and other COVID-related mandates, and election fraud claims. They don't want to deal with that either. So the scariest part of this organization is that it's unfortunately growing. In fact, it's implementing taxpayer-funded trainings at sheriff's departments around the country. So over the last 5 years, the group has hosted trainings, rallies, speeches, and meetings in at least 30 states for law enforcement officers, political figures, private organizations, and members of the public, according to the Howard Center's 7-month probe conducted in collaboration with the Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting. The group has held formal trainings on its constitutional curriculum for law enforcement officers in at least 13 of those states. In 6 states, the training was approved for officers' continuing education credits. This is insane. The group also has supporters who sit on 3 state boards in charge of law enforcement training standards. How is this okay? How is it okay for members of law enforcement to just not only publicly say that we're just gonna enforce the laws that we want to enforce, and then also take taxpayer money to train other members of law enforcement to believe this crap, to actually go along with this crap? One former federal prosecutor described the group's trainings as broader insurrectionist ideology. So just how popular is this group and its ideals? So since 2018, the Howard Center investigation found at least 69 sheriffs nationwide have either been identified as members of the group or publicly supported it, though at least one later disavowed the organization. A 2021 survey of sheriffs by academic researchers working with the nonprofit Marshall Project found that more than 200 of the estimated 500 sheriffs who responded agreed with the group's ideology. And look, this is different from, having discretion as a police officer or as a sheriff's deputy, right? So I'll give you an example. I remember talking to a deputy about an elderly woman who was caught shoplifting. And in this state, it wasn't the state of California, it was a different state. If the store decides they want to prosecute, the police officers are supposed to detain them. She decided, I'm not going to put this elderly woman in handcuffs. That's ridiculous. That kind of discretion, totally fine, but that is not what we're talking about here. In this case, we're literally talking about sheriff's deputies who just decide they don't like certain laws, and as members of law enforcement, they will not enforce those laws. And it's unsurprising, I'm getting a little bit of a right-wing militia feel from some of these members, and I'll provide a little bit of evidence for that in just a moment. So the group does not release the names of its dues-paying members, but we do know the names and activities of the members on the board, okay? So let's start with the co-founder, Sheriff Richard Mack. Mack was an early board member of the Oath Keepers, the group involved in the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. Although he said he split with the group several years ago when it became a militia, Mack still speaks at Oath Keeper affiliated rallies. Wow, really working hard to gain the community's trust as a member of law enforcement. How is this okay? Next up is Michael Perutka, who is another sheriff's group board member and former candidate for Maryland's Attorney General. So he was once affiliated with the League of the South, which supports a free and independent Southern Republic. At a 2019 sheriff's training event, he said, there is a creator God. Our rights come from him. The purpose of civil government is to secure and defend God-given rights. Well, it's a little unconstitutional. I mean, it depends on what he means by God-given rights. If he means the rights that are enshrined in our Constitution, totally fine. There are religious people who think that the Constitution reflects rights that were given to us by God. But given his associations and some of his other political beliefs, I would venture to say, there's a little bit of an issue with how he sees the role of law enforcement. And last but certainly not least, board member and Michigan police officer Dar Leaf, who we heard from a little earlier. Leaf was actually, I can't believe these people are sheriff's deputies. Leaf was investigated but not charged in connection with the Michigan Attorney General's investigation into the alleged illegal seizure and breach of vote counting machines in 2020. He also appeared at an election denier rally with two men later charged in the conspiracy to kidnap Michigan's Democratic governor, Gretchen Whitmer. We need massive reforms in policing in this country. And we need to do that at a time when police departments across the country are dealing with severe deputy shortages. This crap is not helping with any of that. And the fact that it's just happening out in the open with absolutely no backlash, with absolutely no consequences for people who literally do not want to do their jobs is a problem, to say the least. And this has been going on for years now. But thought you should all know that there are literally sheriff's deputies who think they're the ones who get to decide which laws they enforce and which laws they either ignore or refuse to, enforce basically because they just don't agree with it. They're allowing their personal political biases impact their ability to do their jobs. That's not all right. It wouldn't be all right if a judge did that, and it's certainly not all right when a member of law enforcement does it. All right, we gotta take a break. When we come back, Wosny Lombre joins me for the second hour, and we're gonna begin with a story involving Ramaswamy, who likes to brag about how he's self-funded and he doesn't take, corporate PAC money. He's not bought and paid for. But it's not really 100% true. That and more coming up. Don't miss it.
The rest of the news media says you should not fight for positive change. If you do, you're not really a reporter or a journalist, because reporters and journalists don't care what happens. I don't agree. That's not written anywhere. That's not a law. It's just a rule that they invented so that reporters didn't actually challenge the people that are in power. Well, we don't agree with that. We think we should challenge the people in power, that actually makes you a better journalist, not a worse one.
Everywhere you look, things are getting more expensive. Here at TYT, we understand this. That's why we're not gonna price gouge you or use inflation as an excuse to raise our prices. A TYT membership is not your typical subscription, but basic membership is still just $4.99. So what do you get for that price? For starters, you're getting exclusive programming, unique exclusive designs from Shop TYT, access to a members-only chat, giveaways, emojis, and so many other amazing perks. But most importantly, you're helping to make an impact. As a TYT member, you not only help us do the shows every day, but you drive real positive change in the process. In 2017, we helped to start Justice Democrats right here on TYT. That's a group that got a dozen progressives elected into Congress. That's amazing, you did that. Your support also funds TYT's very own investigative reporting. Just recently, our reporters exposed the Fellowship Foundation and pressured lawmakers into boycotting that bigoted event. Isn't that amazing? We raised over $30,000 for Jackson, Mississippi, and delivered clean water to thousands of people in need. Our petitions, polls, and community of activists help keep the corruption of Washington in check. That's the impact of what just $4.99 a month from our members can do. And we're just getting started. Positive change doesn't occur overnight, but with your contribution, we can make it happen together.
I got pulled in. They told me, hey, listen, Cenk, we're insiders. We are the establishment. People in Washington tell me that they're concerned about your tone. We think that there's a better role for you, and it's not in 6 o'clock. The problem with the mainstream media is they're desperate to get access. They don't challenge the government. They don't challenge power. We're supposed to challenge the government. That's the role of the media.
Components that corrupt our politicians, I think, also corrupt mainstream media. It's really difficult for cable outlets to talk about things like income inequality, wealth inequality, when the advertisers that are funding their shows are the same corporations that want to ensure that the same system continues. People watch digital media or new media, they get a completely different message. They focus on the issues that matter or resonate more with the constituency. We need to know one thing. Is the corporate media incompetent?
Corporate media, I can't hear you. Establishment press, where are you? I can't hear you. But the media's position I am clear on. Everything is pro-war, so everything is just framed that way. In this case, I mean, war is inevitable, right? I mean, the defense contractors should get a couple more $1 trillion. You ready for the stunning results? Only 6% of people say they have a great deal of confidence in the press. Wakey, okay? Progressives don't like the media either. You know why? It's the corporate media. Corporate media sounds like a conspiracy. Wait. Who owns you? Multi-billion-dollar corporations, public corporations. Yeah, we're corporate media because corporations own us. Yeah, that's how it works.
Join the Dragon Squad by becoming a YouTube channel member. Click the join button below or sign up on tyt.com/join to get access to fun emojis, a member-only chat, exclusive Shop TYT designs, ad-free watching, and so many other amazing perks. Plus, you get bragging rights for being part of the coolest community on the internet and help us drive real positive change in the world. The Dragon Squad awaits, so join today.
They knew, and they let it happen.
Wosny Lambre joins us for the second hour and the bonus episode for our members. So if you're not a member already, you are gonna miss out, okay? Big time. Woz, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Happy as always to be on with you guys. Obviously my favorite co-host in the entire TYT universe and a Kasparian, so I'm excited.
Thank you. I mean, don't do the other hosts dirty like that, but I love it.
Well, I mean, the other hosts aren't responsible for my entire involvement with the network, so they're gonna have to eat it.
I love it. One of my greatest accomplishments was getting you here at TYT. By the way, I'm gonna read a super chat, and I'm wondering if you are familiar with the reference. So Mikey writes in and says, hot dog is my favorite meat. Congratulations. Do you know what that's a reference to?
I do not.
Oh, guys. Bonus episode, let's get the Romney hot dog video ready, okay? I really want you to see it. You're gonna love it. It's a lot of fun. All right, so let's get started with our first story because, look, I know we've been covering Ramaswamy a lot lately, and it's because he's got a lot of bravado. He likes to make a lot of claims, and we like to do some fact checking, a little bit of investigating, a little bit of digging. And turns out that one of the things he claimed on the debate stage, among other things, by the way, not exactly true. Let's discuss. At the first Republican primary debate, Vivek Ramaswamy asserted that he was the only candidate up on that stage that is not influenced by corporate money, okay? He is not bought and paid for. But there's a great new report by The Lever that indicates that, contrary to what Ramaswamy would have you believe, he does in fact have some pretty close connections with several dark money organizations, and he actually used those connections to further his business and political interests. So Ramaswamy is well known for his work in the biotech industry. That is where he made his money. That is why he is wealthy. But back in 2022, he started another business with funding from Peter Thiel and Senator J.D. Vance's venture capital firm. Okay, that business was an asset management company called Strive. Okay, so Strive was branded as an anti-woke alternative to asset managers like BlackRock. Like BlackRock was. We all know that BlackRock is well known for their social justice stances. You know, they love to buy up entire neighborhoods and price people out of their own, neighborhoods. That's the kind of social justice BlackRock is known for. Aside from, maybe addressing some of the issues in the country with like some shallow statements, BlackRock is not woke at all in any way. But nonetheless, let's watch Ramaswamy explain the premise of the company in an interview that he did just last year on CNBC.
It's kind of the anti-ESG you're launching, is it not?
Well, I find it difficult to be anti-ESG when I find it very difficult to even define what ESG means today. But here's actually what we do stand for, is a message to corporate America to focus on excellence over politics. If you're an oil company, be an excellent oil company. If you're a coal company, be an excellent coal company. And if you're a solar company, be an excellent solar company. But we're not going to tell, for example, oil companies not to be oil companies. And Joe, this relates to, I think, what I call a fiduciary issue with the top asset managers in the world. And what I think is happening today is a problem where the biggest asset managers on the planet, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, I think they're using their clients' capital to advocate for viewpoints in the boardrooms of corporate America that most of their own clients disagree with.
So in order to launch Strive, he obviously needed some funding. And specifically, Ramaswamy is close with something known as the State Financial Officers Foundation, SFOF. SFOF is linked to none other than conservative mega donor Leonard Leo. State Financial Officers Foundation bestowed Ramaswamy its Lifetime Achievement Award in 2022, the year he launched Strive. And Ramaswamy has delivered speeches to the organization and other conservative groups that have worked with SFOF on financial issues in recent years. Further, Ramaswamy also sits on the board of the Leonard Leo-backed Philanthropy Roundtable and is a member of two Leo-backed groups, the Young Conservative Network, Teneo, and the Conservative Lawyers Network, the Federalist Society. So Ramaswamy's connections specifically to this organization appear to be rather instrumental in the success of Strive. So last spring and summer, Ramaswamy or Strive executives contacted financial officers in at least 12 states to pitch Strive's exchange-traded funds, bundles of securities such as stocks and bonds that are traded on exchanges, and in some cases, its advisory services. In all 12 of those states, the top financial officer was a member of the dark money nonprofit SFOF. And here's one specific instance of how the company has actually leveraged or used its leverage for political and financial gain. So in August of 2022, as The Lever writes, Strive co-founder Anson Frericks launched or had lunch in Austin, Texas, with a fossil fuel billionaire and Texas comptroller Glenn Heger, a member of SFOF. Weeks earlier, Heger had introduced Ramaswamy for a talk he was giving on Woke Inc. Woke Inc. is his book. The following month, Heger obliged when Frericks requested a warm introduction to Texas officials overseeing an emerging managers fund. Records show the Texas Employees Retirement Fund had invested $100 million in Strive's anti-China exchange traded fund. So that anecdote, by the way, helps to explain why Ramaswamy was, I believe, the only Republican on the debate stage who referred to climate change as a hoax. And by the way, I want to give voters in the Republican Party, at least some of them, some credit, because I am noticing a split within Republican voters where many of them are now not only acknowledging climate change, but also acknowledging the severity of it, acknowledging that it's man-made, and they're looking for solutions, right? That's not to say that all Republican voters fall in line on that or agree with that. But I am noticing a pretty significant disconnect between the politicians and the voters, which is why I think for the first time you have a debate stage consisting of Republican, politicians getting asked about their plans to address climate change. But again, Ramaswamy was the only one on that stage who literally referred to it as a hoax. And Strive is now facing 2 separate lawsuits from ex-employees of the company who allege that Ramaswamy and Frericks pushed employees to violate securities law, and they also allegedly mistreated staff. The lawyer representing one of those employees has stated the following: Strive was founded in retrospect largely as a PR mechanism for the presidential campaign of Ramaswamy. Not a lot of thought was given to running it as an investment firm. And as of June, the company had over $750 million under its management. So Waz, this is a little bit different from, let's say, moneyed interests funding a campaign. As far as we know so far, Ramaswamy is self-funded. He donated more than $10 million to his own campaign in the first quarter of this year. But I am curious what you think about this, because he's still very much in the swamp. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an interesting way that he got himself into this presidential race, in the sense that here's a rich guy who probably thinks to himself, yo, I should run for president one day. How do I get my name out there? And he notices that this quote unquote woke discourse is, essentially one of the hot button issues in our political life, unfortunately. And he finds a way to shoehorn himself into that conversation. And then because he's rich as hell, unsurprisingly, he's able to form some political connections. And boom, there you have it. Rich guy uses his resources to make political connections. Also is savvy enough to just know, like if you watch Fox News or if you read any, conservative media outlet on the internet, you know exactly what's sort of moving the needle conversationally. And he went about making himself a figure in that conversation. I think what's interesting, man, is all of these art capitalist types, man, and the idea that it's like, oh, we want to manage public pension funds. These people and their derision of publicly funded anything when it's not their own pockets, it's hilarious. It's just the idea that this guy should be managing the pensions of government workers in red states. That sort of raises my eyebrow, and it's just the hypocrisy of it is just amazing to me. But yeah, I'm not surprised that this guy used his resources to peddle influence in political circles, and that gained him entrance.
Exactly. And so when he's on that debate stage and he points fingers, look, rightly, to all the other candidates who are taking money from corporate interests, he tries to provide this this message to voters that oh, I'm above it, right? Like I'm not at all, my ideology, what I would do as president would not be tainted by the desires of these corporate interests. But he's very much enmeshed in that system considering how he made his wealth, considering who he's gotten funding from his previous business ventures. And by the way, Ramaswamy has technically resigned from Strive, but there is a catch to that, and it's the same catch that we experienced during the Trump administration. Ramaswamy retains a stake estimated at 40% of the firm, worth $120 million. His recent personal financial disclosure values his stake in Strive Enterprises at more than $50 million and lists additional Strive holdings worth up to $55 million. So yeah, I mean, look, I don't think that Ramaswamy attempting to be Trump light is going to work out for him. Let's say that the Republican primary ends up being between Ramaswamy and Donald Trump. Why would anyone in the Republican Party end up voting for Ramaswamy, who's like a wannabe Trump, when they could just vote for Trump? I think that's what's likely gonna happen. But it's still super early in the primaries. We'll see how this all plays out. I just think there's just something particularly slimy about Ramaswamy. And I think this is a good example of that, right? To pretend like you're above the money in politics when you're very much swimming in that swamp and have been for a while.
Well, if we could change the metaphor a bit, right? Just the idea that these politicians are prostituting themselves for money from rich guys. Well, in that scenario, Anna, Ramaswamy is the John. Like, you're not above this. Totally. In that scenario. You're the guy paying for the services of these guys. And I think that's why they had so much contempt for him during that debate. It's like, who does this guy think he is? The idea that he's somehow completely clean of this process is nuts, disingenuous, and ridiculous.
Absolutely, totally agree. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, Joe Biden and the Labor Department, under his watch, is proposing something pretty fantastic. Has to do with labor, has to do with what you get paid if you are a salaried worker. I want to tell you about that story and more when we come back. Don't miss it. Welcome back to our show, everybody. All right, I'm gonna read a few comments here. Let's go to, whoa, there's a lot of Twitch comments. I'm gonna start with Dave Schmidt, 311, who gifted 2 subs. Thank you so much for that. Who's Joe Daddy writes in and says, you did nothing wrong, you are a hero. That was a reference to the 2 women, the election workers who were defamed by Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump. I totally agree with you. I hate that they had to go through that. The DeGauzer says, such a load of crap that Trump and Rudy aren't in jail already for indictment of or incitement of violence and attempting to destroy democracy. Well, I mean, they're going to trial, so let's see how that plays out. But I hear you, I can understand the frustration. Sunglasses Tony says Giuliani was a voice for the highest office in the land. He abused that power at the order of 45, meaning Donald Trump. Absolutely. Atrolpi resubscribed for 39 months. Thank you. Poor Rudy. Not Anna Solo Hours are a highlight of my week. Happy Hump Day, TYT fam. Thank you so much. Happy Hump Day. My favorite time of the week is when the Wednesday show is over, right? Because it's like I have survived Hump Day. It's smooth sailing. All I have to do is show up tomorrow, obviously after producing the show with my team, and just let Cenk go off. All right, present the stories, let Cenk go off. I'm good. All right, Peachy Shari says, should they have de-energized the lines before the storm? Yes. Were they to blame for the first fire? Apparently. Does anyone know the cause of that second fire, the one that devastated Lahaina? I'm not saying they're innocent, I just don't know. I feel like blaming the firefighters here is wrong, but can you really insinuate they are to blame for the second fire without any evidence? Well, look, it really depends, right? So how was the second fire reignited? Were the lines in fact de-energized after they ignited the first fire with the, unde-energized lines? I don't know. So I'm glad they're being sued. They absolutely should be sued, and proper investigation should take place. But the fact that they're skirting very specific questions as they're doing press conferences and stuff doesn't really look good. Solo Flight writes in and says, Anna is doing good reporting right now. Not everything she does I agree with, but reporting like this is what we need. Thank you so much, I really appreciate that. And we don't have to agree on everything, obviously. Some of my favorite content creators, hosts, even people within this network cover stories and say things that I don't 100% agree with, but I respect and want to protect their right to share their perspectives and their opinions. And so thank you for sharing that comment with us. We've got, we got to get back. Okay, Franklin Sharp Slicer 6 says, as it is legal, the donation should go into a pool, GOP and Democrat, equally distributed to candidates' funds. Yes.
You stay classy, San Diego.
Ron Burgundy play some Yaz flute? That's the real question here. All right, welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian and Wosny Lambre with you. Woz, Biden is a bit of a mixed bag, especially as it pertains to labor. So yeah, here's an example of the Biden administration doing something good, actually. Let's talk about it. Today, the Labor Department announced that millions of Americans could be eligible for overtime pay if their proposal does in fact become the law of the land. Now, big businesses have already stopped one attempt by a Democratic president to extend overtime pay to more Americans, and it's all but certain that they'll try to do so again. But nonetheless, let's talk about what the Labor Department is trying to accomplish and why it's a good thing, and then we'll see whether or not it will end up getting implemented. So, right now, almost all hourly workers in the United States, luckily, do in fact get overtime pay if they've worked more than 40 hours in a week, okay? And it's at no less than a time and a half their current pay. However, salaried workers who perform executive, administrative, or professional roles are exempt from receiving overtime pay if they are paid over a certain threshold. So prior to 2019, that threshold was just $23,660. But the Trump administration, to their credit, did increase that threshold. Still incredibly low if you ask me, $35,568. Now, the Labor Department is hoping to increase that threshold further. So if you're a salaried worker who's making $55,000, you would essentially be able to get paid overtime pay if you end up working more than 40 hours a week. The department also plans to raise that threshold every 3 years in line with earnings data. So this change would affect a lot of Americans, 3.6 million to be exact, a massive number. And so the left-leaning Economic Policy Institute has estimated that about 15% of full-time salaried workers are entitled to overtime pay under the Trump era policy. That's compared to more than 60% in the 1970s. Now, under the new rule, 27% of salaried workers would be entitled to overtime pay because they make less than the threshold, according to the Labor Department. So I'm gonna pause for comment, Woz, because I'm not sure if you've experienced the salaried worker situation where you earn a salary, but you're expected to work more than 8 hours a day. Way more than 8 hours a day, and then you don't get paid for all that overtime because you're a salaried worker.
Yeah, so for people, I've experienced it sort of indirectly, right? And I've talked about working at UPS before. Oftentimes when management tries to recruit you from, an hourly worker to a salaried employee, the idea being that as an hourly guy, your hours can get jerked around from week to week. You don't know, theoretically how much work is going to be available, so therefore you don't know how much money you're going to make. The enticement of becoming, say, a supervisor, and then maybe if you climb the ladder and you become a manager, is that you will have a consistent salary all the time, right? You know how much you're going to get paid all the time. However, yes, those same supervisors were expected to work long ass hours. That's just the freaking case, and they weren't eligible for overtime. And say some of like the busiest seasons, like when it comes to like November, December, January, which is UPS's busiest seasons, like you might spend 10, 12 hours in that warehouse, and these supervisors are not getting paid extra to do so. Essentially, management is extracting free labor from these folks for nothing. It's completely unfair. And the idea that the threshold being like, well, the idea, of course, Anna, being like, well, if you make $110,000 in your salaried position, you don't need overtime. And okay, I might be willing to grant you that. But if you make $36,000 or $37,000, the idea that you can work a 12-hour day and not get paid any OT for it, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And look, there's also this little trick that's played in some companies where they'll give workers like these kind of phony management titles in order to essentially make them salaried workers and then overwork them and not give them their due pay for all the work they put in and all the hours they put in. Higher thresholds might also benefit, by the way, historically disadvantaged populations, including women who earn a median of $993 a week, and median Black and Hispanic workers who both earn below the new $1,059 proposed threshold. I think that threshold is still so low. Anyway, but before the rule can become law, there are gonna be some bumps along the way, some obstacles along the way. It first needs to go through a public commentary period, after which it could be challenged through the courts. And it is very likely that it will be challenged in court if history is any guide. So one example is back in 2016, when Biden was actually serving as vice president, he announced a similar rule that would have raised the threshold to around $47,500. Remember, this is years ago in 2016. That was challenged by not that many people, just 21 states, the Chamber of Commerce, and 50 other business groups. So, just a little bit of a bump in the road. Eventually, a federal judge overturned the proposal. And unfortunately, even if the rule is not challenged, it's likely that businesses will do whatever they can to get around it. So, referencing what I had mentioned earlier, researchers at Harvard Business School and the University of Texas at Dallas found that from 2010 to 2018, there was a 485% increase in managerial titles for workers just over the overtime threshold. All told, that adds up to over 151 million hours that companies don't have to pay for, costing workers $4 billion in dodged overtime pay annually. So they will fight this. I don't know if this is actually gonna go anywhere, but I do give the Labor Department credit because it's clear to me that in the context of pretty awful administrations with terrible labor departments that didn't actually look out for labor, Biden's doing something. I mean, I feel like the Biden administration has been the most labor friendly in my lifetime, at least. What are your thoughts, Waz?
Yeah, it's interesting. Every now and again, Sleepy Joe wakes up, it seems. And this is one of those times where the administration has gotten off of their butts and done something. And again, this is the type of thing you can campaign on. It's very simple to explain to voters how this is beneficial to the vast majority of them. Let's face it, most people aren't in jobs that pay them, nice 6-figure salaries. Like this is incredible. And make no mistake, how they're gonna fight this, guys. The managerial class is gonna be like, oh, we're gonna have to dump employees. We can't incur these costs, and they're gonna scare people, try to scare people, and say, oh, we can't have workers who get paid for their work. Trust me, this is not gonna result in a guy or girl making $40,000 now getting bumped up to 57 so that they don't reach the threshold for overtime. That's not what's gonna happen. It's gonna be, people who are way closer to the threshold getting minor bumps and then getting worked into the ground again. And yes, they are gonna go on an anti-wage increase campaign, crying and saying that they can't afford to pay workers for the work that they do.
Right, despite record corporate profits. Of course they're gonna say that. They got that fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. They reign supreme, they're the most important, so. All right, let's have a little bit of fun, shall we? Are we ready for a little bit of fun? All right, let's talk about bad ideas by Donald Trump.
Crooked Joe Biden's only campaign strategy is indicting me. That's all they can do. Keep indicting him on nonsense. Going on extended vacations and sleep, sleep, sleep. That's what he wants to do. He wants to sleep and he wants to go to the beach and sleep. He thinks he looks good in a bathing suit. He doesn't.
Listen, some people are arguing that the latest idea from Donald Trump to essentially be a content creator who puts out dozens of videos a day is a bad idea. I disagree. I think that maybe it's one of the best ideas he's ever had, okay? Because dude's entertaining and funny as hell. That was just a little taste of it. Now, seriously though, Donald Trump has launched his latest venture as a content creator, which in all seriousness is a pretty bad idea for a guy who is now facing indictments in 4 separate cases, 2 federally and 2 on a state level. And in just 24 hours, he has posted over 50 video clips of himself talking about various things and throwing around a lot of insults. Remember, Waz, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, but they indicted him and he doesn't care. He's gonna go for this, and honestly, I'm here for it. What do you think?
Obviously, I share that sentiment. That was a very highly entertaining clip. Joe Biden in a bathing suit just warmed my soul just now. Just the thought of that. But yeah, the guy seems to be pretty reckless and indifferent to these damn charges. Like the idea that you would go out and speak publicly about the cases that you have pending would seem like defendant suicide. But this guy's just like, you know what? I'm jumping in head first. He loves the camera, obviously. He loves talking about himself, obviously. And so he's gonna give it a go.
Oh, he does not care. He is ready and willing to be reckless. So he announced on Truth Social, I'm pleased to inform you that periodically, I will be doing videos on Truth Social that will be discussing many subjects in many time frames. You will be able to choose the video and policy that you like and may want to reply to on Truth Social. Enjoy. So look, I don't know exactly why he's doing this. I do think, it is a bad idea for him, great idea for us. I mean, I'm here for the entertainment. But, I do think that maybe this is an effort to drum up some, business for Truth Social. And we want to give you some examples of the kinds of videos that he's putting out there. So most of the videos were addressed to various political groups across the country, but quickly digressed into his usual talking points. So of course, he mentioned his indictment, which is the worst idea. He's actually been warned by judges to not do this, and how he never thought this would even happen to him, because of course he didn't think this could ever happen to him. He's always been treated as if he's above the law. But all of a sudden, not so much. Anyway, without further ado, here's a little taste of that video.
After your all-time favorite president, me, was indicted again, it will be now 4 times. My whole life, I never got indicted or even thought about it, and now they're indicting me every chance they get. But once I was indicted again as a completely innocent man, we need to end the month as strong as possible. We're fighting them like nobody else knows how to fight.
So he's definitely also doing this to raise money. I mean, what do you say to that? What do you say to that?
It's your favorite president, me.
Okay.
That's incredible. And you know, in all honesty, I think it's just this idea that he probably feels like he needs to go on the offensive with quote unquote his side or his version of the story. And it's crazy because they've made the correct calculation, in my opinion, that even the most hackiest journalists on the right would have to ask him some of the most basic questions involving his case, even if they were softballs. Like even the person with the least credibility would have to ask him the most basic questions, and he would probably have to start lying, man, and have to start damaging his case in the public. So they probably decided, like, yeah, instead of talking to a journalist and getting our versions of the case out there, let's just drop some truths on him. But Anna, I wanted to ask you, do you have a Truth Social account? Is there an Anna Kasparian Finsta Truth Social out there, or no?
Was. I don't even want to keep up with my other social media accounts. Are you kidding me right now? Like yesterday, Cenk sent me one of his tweets, and I was like, all right, you know what? I haven't been active on Twitter, and I feel like I need to like give the people something. So I just retweeted him. I think that was like the most Twitter activity I've had in like weeks. I hate social media. It makes me depressed. So the idea that I would create a Truth Social account is the most insane
You're not curious about all the truth that's being slung out there on the Truth Social network?
You can read the truth on Truth Social without actually creating an account. That's how I've watched a lot of these videos. But with that said, in that same vein as the last video that we showed you, he went after Biden and Jack Smith for targeting him. By the way, I haven't seen these videos ahead of time. I'm lying. I wanted to kind of like keep this for actual genuine reaction live on air. So let's watch.
The justice system is being wielded as a weapon against Joe Biden's political opponents, me primarily. Why isn't the DOJ raiding crooked Joe Biden's house? Why aren't they raiding his phones? He's the most corrupt and incompetent president in the history of the United States. That's the one they should be looking at. You could take the 5 worst presidents in American history, put them together, and they would not have done the damage that crooked Joe Biden has done to our nation in just a few short years.
They're not raiding Biden's house because Biden didn't intentionally take classified documents home with him. And then when he realized he did have possession of some classified documents, he immediately contacted the right people and handed them over. You, on the other hand, refused to comply, had months and months to comply, and he refused to hand over the classified documents. In fact, he implicated his own lawyers because his lawyers lied. Well, I don't know if they wittingly lied or unwittingly lied, but they told the federal government that no, he doesn't have any more classified documents. That's it, you guys have everything. And now they're in trouble. Like, it's just, it's amazing. It's amazing. Why don't they, I don't know, Waz, why don't they raid Joe Biden's home? Why don't they do it?
Well, because if you put together the top 5 worst DOJs in history, this one is stacked up above them. That was an incredible line right there. Yeah, I did. Joe Biden's more corrupt than the 5 most corrupt presidents ever combined. Wow. I mean, that is just, that's amazing. Yes, I'm looking forward to this, and you've convinced me. Maybe not to get an account like you said, because we can watch these truths without an account. But I might be checking in on these daily.
I mean, they're hilarious. Okay, so I'm actually going to skip ahead. Let's pivot to the 2024 presidential election because Trump wants to brag about the polling, which, to be fair, in the Republican field, he's doing quite well, even after skipping the first primary debate. So let's hear what he has to say about that. This is video H5.
Great polls just out, leading by 40, 50, and even 60 points. Who expected that? I did. DeSanctimonious is crashing. Perhaps the party should come together. People should drop out of the race. We unify. And we beat Biden and the Democrats. They should be easy to beat.
I did. Me. just quit the politics and tour the country as a comic. Like, I'd pay to watch. I would, I really would. As long as you have no impact on our politics or how the country's governed, I will support his comedy career. I really would. I think he could make a lot of money.
Especially if it's just gonna be about sick burns of his enemies. Invoking Ron DeSantis there, of all the other candidates who he's leading by 40, 50, even 60%, just directly going at DeSantis and nobody else was just, beautiful.
Now, he's not done with DeSantis quite yet. And even though I haven't seen this video yet, he is going after DeSantis over something that I care deeply about, that I think is incredibly important. In fact, something that is wildly popular with the American people. Let's watch.
I will protect Social Security and Medicare for our great seniors, which is not being done by Ron DeSanctimonious. I will tell you, he voted 3 times against Social Security, and he wanted to bring the minimum age all the way up to 70. But that's not gonna happen with me. I will protect Social Security and Medicare.
Trump were disciplined and he just really focused on that kind of messaging. I think he could even beat Biden, right?
Yeah, I think it's this kind of stuff that carried him through
100%
in 2016. Of course, obviously the anti-immigration stuff was a great boon to his campaign. Like, we know that. And obviously it was hateful and all of that stuff. But acknowledging that NAFTA was a disaster for normal everyday Americans is just true. That resonated with people. Acknowledging that Social Security and Medicare are extremely popular with the people who they benefit made sense, right? I think those are the kind of things that carried the day. I think the reason why he overperformed against Biden in 2020 in many ways was because he sent people them damn checks and put his name on it. I think a lot of this populist stuff worked for him in his previous 2 campaigns, and he would be very smart to stick to this stuff. And just hearing a Republican just come out and say, like, I'm not some Paul Ryan vampire crazy person who wants to privatize and thereby strip all the benefits of Social Security and Medicare, just come out and say, like, I'm for these things, and say it with a full-throated embrace. That's just, I don't know the last Republican who's done that.
Absolutely.
I'm like, I have no idea.
No, I mean, it's not a priority for the Republican Party, right? The Republican Party has historically been against these types of social safety net programs, which is why an anti-establishment, pro-social security, anti-swamp, at least just based on what he said, right? Obviously, we have issues with his policies and he didn't actually mean a lot of what he said when he was campaigning, but that's beside the point. There's a difference between actual policy governing and then the politics of it. He gets the politics right. And he specifically had this kind of messaging at a time when Americans were furious of 8 straight years of a Democratic politician, Barack Obama, saying that he was all about hope and change, all about helping people and lifting them up economically. And then at the end of the day, he bailed out, he was a fan of bailouts, expansions of wars abroad, all of the things that we actually hated about the Bush administration. And so Trump capitalized off that moment, and it did carry him through, if you ask me, during the 2016 campaign. If he plans on using that same tactic for the 2024 presidential campaign, I really do think it's going to help him out, certainly with winning the Republican primary. But when you look at the polling, possibly even the general election, if Biden does in fact run for re-election. Other topics he talked about in the videos, how he would obliterate the deep state, how he would allegedly end the overdose epidemic, even though he had 4 years to work on that and did nothing, and that he would prevent World War III. He called Rupert Murdoch a globalist. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that, as this headline notes, this is a nightmare for Trump's defense team. Everything he says can be used against him. And I guarantee you it will, but Trump can't be controlled. So buckle up. It's gonna be a wild and potentially fun ride. Anyway, we got more to get to after the break. We'll see you there.
Your all-time favorite president, sleep. Sleep.
Welcome back to our social break. When we come back from the break, we're gonna have very limited time. So there was one more Trump video that we didn't show you. We're gonna do that when we come back. But for now, let's read some comments. We have Altruism is Imaginary writing in and saying, I made it out of Hurricane Idalia's path. That's good to hear. Based on the reporting that I saw, I don't think anyone was hurt. There were some trees that fell. I think everything is okay, but I don't know. Don't quote me on that because the last report I saw was like right before the show started, and I don't know if anything's changed. Dead to Pool 268 subscribed for 18 months with a very simple comment. Oh yeah. Cody, the epilepsy dragon, says Dennis Prager is going on David Pakman for an interview. Should be good. Sure. I mean, that's not a comment on David Pakman. Dennis Prager. Wolf. Let's go to our new members. We have JS there for, just there for T, duh. Vargas 15, 115. Polgar the Sorceress Dragon. Maya H, and thank you to No More Pot for You, who gifted 10 TYT memberships. I appreciate that, although I do not appreciate that handle. Hyper Fresh writes in and says, someone needs to make running for office free to all citizens. Sean Carter says, if we had secure digital voting with an online site for all party members and policy, we would not need campaign financing for ads, right? Digital, I am not a big fan of digital voting. I think paper ballots are important. I'm not really sure how the two things really connect, but I do think we need public financing of our elections. Teddy Cool writes it and says, Waz deserves his own show on TYT. Give him that promotion, Cenk. Waz had a show on TYT, but it was on the Twitch channel. Are you still making content for Rebel HQ?
No Rebel HQ for me. I'm just on here supporting my family, man. You know, the Annas, the Johns, the Dr. Richies. I'm a support player, man. I'm here to buttress the team. That's it. I don't need all the adulation and the attention and the adoration. I'm good just being a bit player here, guys.
But also, you've got your own thing going on over at
I got a full-time job.
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, talking about things that I would venture to say happen to be a little more fun than some of the stuff we talk about here.
Yeah, it's a lot less depressing than you know, the state of the American average person.
Totally. All right, let's get back to the show.
Sleep.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian and Wosny Lambre. We've got a massive bonus episode for our members after the main show. tyt.com/join to become a member, or click on that join button if you're watching us on YouTube. So a story broke after we went live regarding Peter Navarro. He had a hearing today, and he got a little salty over someone holding a sign he didn't like as he was speaking to the press. So we're gonna share that story with you, along with Jesse Waters and other conservatives making a pretty absurd claim about how black voters feel about Trump after the release of his mugshot. And if we have time, and I think we might, we'll also talk a little bit about how a brothel in Nevada is offering discounts to the fine people over at Utah because they believe that people living in Utah are the most sexually repressed. There's a specific reason why they think that, so we'll talk about that as well. Members help support the show. We would not be able to do this without you. So you'll get that exclusive coverage and more. tyt.com/join to become a member. Okay. All right, let's go to some member comments since we've got limited time. Oh my God, someone sent a photo of their dog. Okay, Ashura writes in with the cutest picture of this Chihuahua. Hey Anna, this is a picture of my sister's new puppy. He's 5 months old and won't get any bigger. He's a Chihuahua Pomeranian mix. Aww. I wish I could share this photo with you. Very cute dog. Very curious what the dog's name is. Uriah Heap writes in and says, Giuliani has what I call Donald Trump syndrome. Just get close to Orange Man for only a moment and you will immediately start lying, cheating, and stealing. No known cure available at this time. I mean, I think Trump attracts a certain type of person. And I think that Giuliani's got a lot of other issues going on, including what we talked about yesterday about his sobriety problems. Mechanic 66 says, when I lived in Maui, I upgraded the electricity or the electric system at my house. The original wiring wasn't very deep and was in the wrong type of conduit, as well as rusted and too small. Mechanic, I'm jealous that you know how to do that kind of stuff. I did something incredible yesterday, Waz. Do you want to know what it is?
Of course.
I, just a normal, everyday human being, installed a hardwired smoke detector.
You mean you plugged the wire into the back of the smoke detector?
I had to do a little thing where you color, it's color coded, but there's like 3 wires, right? One wire is unnecessary for some reason, but it's there. And then there's the red wire and the black wire. And then you it's called a nut. Like that thing is called a nut. So you put the wires, you make sure they're touching, and then you cover. Oh,
so you actually did something. Okay, I thought you were talking about.
I was messing around with nuts yesterday.
When the wire is coming, the wire is just coming out of the wall, and you just click it into the smoke detector. But you did some real work. Kudos to you for that. How'd you figure out how to do that? Did you go on YouTube or Reddit, or how'd you figure that out?
Well, the old smoke detector was very, very old. It was past its lifespan. So when I was taking it off, I just made note of which wire, what they had done. And then I just copied it again. And it worked. It worked. It was great. I felt really good about myself after I did that. By the way, I know that's not that big of a deal, okay? I'm not delusional. But I was still proud of myself because it's totally something.
No, you're a radical feminist, Anna. What are you talking about? That's what that is.
Thank you. All right, we've got Sully who says, thank you to TYT. I always watch the replay during the day and evening in New Zealand. That's awesome to hear. New Zealand's one of the countries that I'm eager to visit. So thank you for writing in. Trista says, Mitch. I can say this word, right? Mitch, Bo bitch, banana fan of faux fitch, soon no, I'm not gonna, I can't. I get it. We don't like him as a politician.
You don't like Mitch McConnell, but he's still a human being.
Exactly, exactly, yeah. God, I hate that I have a heart because I wanna be able to celebrate bad things happening to bad people, but I can't. It's just not who I am. Anyway, Brett Campbell, AKA Dragon My Ass says, Anna, don't wear yourself out trying to talk sense with Trump. It's an impossibility. Oh, believe me, I'm not trying to talk sense into anything. He wants to put that content out there and potentially incriminate himself further. Do you, boo? Like I said, we do enjoy watching those videos. Some of them are pretty funny. In our Twitch communities, we have Progressive37 who subscribed for 26 months and says that they love TYT. We love you right back. And by the way, after the bonus episode today for our members, you can head on over to twitch.tv/TYT to watch Brett Ehrlich and Happy Half Hour, the show that he hosts. It is not depressing. It's a lot of fun, and I promise you will love it. But for now, we're gonna go over to our bonus episode, tyt.com/join. See you there.
Your all-time favorite president, me.
Our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move them. Turn them into lava.